My name is Brittany Cole Bush. I'm from the state of California in the United States, and I've been working in the fields of land stewardship and livestock with bringing sheep and goats into the urban periphery for an ecosystem service of using grazing as a tool to manage vegetation. And I've been doing so for almost the last 10 years. And I continue to um, look to work in this field to inspire some good impact on the ground, new businesses, and potentially bring along and invite new types of grazers into this work. With me came Guido Francini of True Grass Farms in Valley Ford, California, which is right above the San Francisco Bay in the North Bay, Marin County. Uh, Guido also is a next generation grazer. Both he and I don't have any agricultural background in our families for the last couple generations, so we represent a new kind of revival back into livestock. All right. So really, our work, my initial interest in this work was inspired by the book "The Art and Science of Shepherding," written and edited by Michel Murray in France and Fred Provenza, who both have come forward to mentor me on this journey and put us in touch with a lot of individuals that we were able to meet. It's really through this question of understanding what programs are out there in the world that are training folks in this ancient vocation into a modern day context. And that really the question is can a program like this in the Western United States exist, and how would it fit into our context? And that question really was what inspired our interest in going out and seeing how it's being done elsewhere. So what we'd like to do is share with you the content of a report that we produced, and it will be available to all of you who've signed up to watch this webinar. And so this will give you a little bit of a visual experience of what we observed in our research. I appreciate both Michelle and Fred and all of the folks they put us in touch with to have such a full experience and really successful in obtaining the research and the inspiration that we were out in Spain and France to get. Again, our research was aimed to understand these vocational programs that are creating a new workforce in this field of animal husbandry and land management and pastoralism. This was our route. We initially landed in Barcelona and headed to the Basque region up into the Haute-Pyrénées. Pardon my, I'm going to not be too successful in translation, so please forgive me for those of you who speak all the variety of languages we came across in our journey. We went into the Pyrenees and then headed up north up into the Alps region. And then traversed back down through what is the Provence region of France, and followed our way south through Catalonia and back to Barcelona. Guido and I traveled in an old VW van, and so we were able to really get an understanding of the landscape through our camping, but then also being taken into the homes of a lot of individuals who are associated with the schools and farmers and pastoralists and connections that we've made along our way. Our primary goal was to analyze the structures of these programs and the curriculums that are used to train these professional grazers and producers of dairy, meat, and fiber products. And what we found is really this work is incredibly important to the cultural preservation of each of these regions, and how unique and individual the contexts are of these different places. We collected data, schedules, curriculums, understanding statistics of demographics of each of these schools. We visited 4 different schools listed here, and I'll go through some of the specifics of each school to kind of summarize our general takeaways and the differences between each school. First off, I'm going to just give some context to the definitions that we'll be using. Pastoralism is one of the oldest forms of agricultural practices, and it still exists today. However, has the population of pastoralists has reduced based off of how the structuring of nations have formed borders and boundaries, really restricting this idea of a seasonal rotation and moving our animals with seasons and based off of access to water and vegetation. We're going to talk about pastoralism in a contemporary context that also includes understanding that technologies are also used, such as the electric fence, that is a modern day derivation from your traditional herding with dogs. So I wanted to point that out, is that we're keeping kind of a modern loose idea of what pastoralism can entail in this context. And again, there's many populations of pastoralists around the world that operate differently and have different challenges and different structures in which they learn. And a lot of this is passed on knowledge and sheer richness of culture. And again, things are changing as our Earth climate, both ecologically and socially, is changing so rapidly. I wanted to point out transhumanance, which is this idea of the movement of animals and their tenders following the seasons and the seasonality, and the importance of recognizing the alignment of the reproduction cycle of an animal and where one chooses to bring them based off of course, seasonal factors. In the altitude, you have snow and whatnot, but then also forage quality and really what your operation and focus is of the time. Are you lambing? What time of year are you going to be bringing the animals down for that? All of these things kind of are umbrella under transhumanance. And I wanted to point out, even in the Western United States context, where we don't have open spaces like the idea of the commons that we see in Europe, we have a culture that is, and a landscape that's more subdivided because of privatization and fences, these permanent fences. So our ability in the Western United States to live in this move and tend to our animals and manage our animals seasonally is really relying upon transportation of big trucks and whatnot. And it still happens. Basque Americans bring their animals that have traditionally been herded through a circuit of through what is the Western United States, of course, not focused on state, but on watersheds and geographic pieces that make a place. And so pastoralism and this idea of transhumanance has evolved. However, it still exists, and there are plenty of sheep outfits that do move to higher country in the summers and then back down low in the valleys. And this is in reflection of really how animals in the wild and cloven hooved animals move based on the seasons of reproduction and such. So transhumanists we're also going to speak a little bit about within the context of these schools. What we found is that the breeder, producer, farmer, the owner of the animals, can be different from the shepherd or the herder, or the tender rather, and that the shepherd actually gets hired by the producer or breeder or farmer. All of these words are used kind of interchangeably and kind of different within each language and region. They're either called producer or farmer or breeder. But then the shepherd and the herder are those who are hired and employed for the management of these animals based on the seasons and the demands and necessities for vegetation at different times of year. For the sake of this presentation, I will use more of a broad scope term of grazer, one who grazes, manages grazing. So I'll be using shepherd, herder, grazer interchangeably. Our adventure began in the Basque region of Spain. We visited both Biscaya and Gipuzkoa. Outside of Bilbao is where we first landed, and were invited into the home of some wonderful Basque folks and a mutual friend who is from the very areas in which we're from, in the North Bay of San Francisco, and she's studying food sovereignty within the Basque region. And so we were really able to kind of dig into the cultural context of food and food production and agriculture, and the current state of affairs in terms of food production within the region. Silvopasture is used. Sheep are used to manage the succession in these higher elevations where we see a lot of these pines. The pastures are, like I said, maintained by the sheep, and they've been around for quite some time. Again, the first school we visited was in the Basque region of Gipuzkoa, and it's called Artzain Escola. The purpose of this particular school is really focused on the technical skill sets to produce the regional cheese from the heritage breed, the Lacha. I believe that's the pronunciation in Spanish, so bear with me. The school offers an intensive training for this production of these sheep that produces the dairy that creates the cheese, very specific and regional, and important to the tradition and culture and heritage of the Basque people. It also is a general agricultural resource center for farmers within the region. It also acts as the production facility for the Idezabal cheese, which is a local cheese consortium. Hazi is an organization that supports the school in partnership with the Franciscan Brotherhood that owns the land that the school is on. The duration of the program is about 6 months. There's technical training within a classroom type of setting, and then 16-week practical training that brings students from the very beginning, all of the aspects of animal husbandry, production of sheep and nutrition and reproduction, into the cheese production, and then also into the cheese making, and finally into some of the economics. You can see a little bit more of their curriculum. I did want to point out that the cohorts are at about 14 trainees per cohort. The average age is around 27. There has been seen an increase of women applicants over the years. However, they maintain to be around 22% of the trainees. Again, the emphasis is really on the production of the Lakcha sheep, and the financial support and structures through Hazi, which is the regional rural development, agriculture, education organization, and also the support of the Franciscan Brotherhood. The success rate is around 63% of all graduates who come through who remain to be sheep producers or somehow affiliated with the industry as either technical support or employees of producers. We're able to interview an administrator, Baptiste Atiagi, and he's one of the lead coordinators who was able to really give us a nice tour of the facilities. There are barn facilities. There's a cheese making facility. There a dairy parlor and aging dairy aging rooms for the cheese, and then also a tourist center for education and to buy product. Here you see indoor feeding. There's actually a conveyor belt that really helps to ration the feed of the Laksha sheep. The genetics have been very strongly preserved in the region, and as you can see, these are mama ewes. They have a tight breeding program. They supplement babies that have any issues with their moms. Any bummers are taken care of to keep their production high. They have a state-of-the-art milking parlor. This was designed and manufactured in France, and Bautis was really proud of this technology that has been used to really create such an amazing product that's been a very important regional aspect of their culture through this cheese. Bringing technology into this production has been very important in in the evolution of this industry. Here you have aging cheese. Bautis really explaining all of these things, and fortunately he derived from Basque, speaking Basque to speaking Spanish, so I was able to really catch on. And we also, part of this was visiting producers of the Laksha sheep. They are a coarse wool sheep, but primarily used for dairy. We didn't experience much of the lamb being used for meat production. Primarily dairy, and no understanding of the uses of the coarse wool. Management of the sheep here are generally in these permanent fence lines. I didn't see much of the rotation within electric fence lines. However, these animals were not meant to stay here long. This was at one of the farms of the cheese consortium. This is Idioa Aparicio and her husband Ricardo Miras Garcia. They're Laksha sheep and cheese producers. Their farm is called Uritzi in Musquis, Vizcaya, and they are a part of the Idiazabal Origin Cheese Consortium and award winners in their incredible product. Also, we visited Felix Adruria, who's also a sheep and dairy producer for Idiazabal and is on the board for the school as well. He showed us a lot of the interesting things about his production. He uses a regionally produced seed, and he extracts the oils and uses what is produced out of this whole process to use as the fuel for a lot of his machinery in his production. He invited Guido and I into his home to eat and share food with him and his family, and he shared with us and gifted us this beautiful book that really shows the incredible bucolic and photographic history and storytelling of this region. Of course, the best way to get to know folks is to sit down and share food, and that was definitely something Guido required. Is that the best, more importantly than our formal surveys, was that we got to break bread and really try to understand each other and our cultures and where we're coming from, and realizing that it's really the camaraderie and the love that we all share and passion for animals and working on the land and producing food and fiber. Those things were really important and significant to our work, was that connection. This is some of the images from the beautiful book that Felix gifted us. You can see this work from Gemma Arud Gaeta. Oh my goodness, basket's hard, guys. She just does such an excellent job of portraying visually this incredible culture that has been intact. Again, more information about this particular breed and how it has evolved. We next headed north up into the Alps and landed in the region, the Drôme region, at the base of the Alps, to visit a CFPPA, which is in the region of D or Die. There are 3 pastoral programs of the CFPPA, which in general is adult continuing education center, a network of these schools that are serving folks for vocational training and continuing education and different career paths pertaining to agriculture and forestry. These centers have been established by the French Ministry of Agriculture and are supported through government aid. There are, again, 3 pastoral programs with different focuses. One is the Alpine dairy herder. One is a transhumanant herder, a shepherd in the Pyrenees, and the other one is also a herder in a different region. And they all have different emphasis on either species or production of, say, dairy from a cow, or through the management of the sheep for seasonal shepherding circuits. There's a little bit about the kind of an overall general. Less than 20 trainees per cohort. The average age range is between 24-45 years old. But as you can see, historically, ages have ranged from teenagers all the way up into the folks in their 60s. Cost between 6,000 7,000 euros. Many of the tuitions are fully paid for based on the context of the trainee, and about 80% of trainees from the specific program of the High Mountain Herder training go on to work as grazers professionally in the field. So we got to visit D, and these were the emphasis of the program at D. We were able to survey an administrator who was able to kind of break down the curriculums of the alpine management of the sheep and the cattle. A part of this was learning how to live in an alpine setting, which is something very important to point out, is that there's not just technical training and experience on the ground, but how to live within the context of your lifestyle, being living in elevation and living remotely and by yourself. One of the other programs is focused on the dairy production. Again, a big part of this training is apprenticeship and working with folks who are already experienced. Ecology and vegetation management is a part of this training, which is very important, as well as how to use the equipment and maintain the equipment when you're up there. This program in particular is a little over 1,300 hours and goes from March to October. And this is another of their training, which is in the Pyrenees. Herding, driving with dogs is a part of this training. Of course, animal husbandry, reproduction, things like this, very important. Pastoralism in the context historically, moving animals seasonally in that transhumanant context. And mountain route maintenance, how do you maintain the spaces in which you're moving your animals in? circuits. And then there's it's a 2-year program with the professional development project at the very end. So again, these schools are focused and marrying the technical experience with the practical experience with the direction of vocation. While we were up there close to the Alps, we decided to go head up, and it was winter time, so of course we got to get some snow. We weren't quite sure if our old van was going to make it up there, but fortunately, with some shepherding of a new friend, Christophe Galleron, an artist and a collaborator of Maison du Berger, we were able to get up there. To visit Maison du Berger, which is translated as the House of the Shepherd. It's an incredible place. It's a center that celebrates pastoralism around the world and within the region. It's an education center. Young folks come in for different presentations and really get to learn the lifestyle of the shepherd and the tradition and what it looks like in current context there, as well as around the world. It acts as an institution and a cultural service for the world in the region of Champsoa. This was quite the experience. So this is an example, just a screenshot from their website of one of the exhibitions, which is this particular one is really talking about the challenges of a changing tradition. Profession. Was really inspiring just to see how saturated all of the information and resources there were specific to the work of living on the land with animals and managing what it looks like managing open spaces and the history of, and then looking into the future, how is it transitioning. It's really incredible to have so much information in one place. We were kindly welcomed into the Maison du Berger, and they were equally excited to know that there are folks out there like us in California and the United States very excited about the preservation of this type of work and also the proliferation and the growing of grazers throughout the world, and how do we train them. It was here that we were able to meet somebody very significant in the culture and community of shepherds within the region. Andre Leroy, he's been a shepherd of 40 years. He's raised 2 of his children up in the Alpine of the Alps with his wife, and he's managed to be not only a steward of this landscape that works directly with the managers of the national parks, but has been an educator and a mentor and really a holder of wisdom of the landscapes of the Pyrenees, of the Alp region. And he is testament to the importance of the transfer of experience and wisdom on a landscape through teaching directly. He has of course noted his circuits that he takes his animals and whatnot, but it's quite challenging, if you could imagine being a shepherd looking at a map when you have all of this terrain. And so Andre is one who holds a lot of the wisdom of the region of how shepherding and moving these animals and through various landscapes and protecting them through predators. He holds a lot of that wisdom, and we were able to interview him. Christophe Galleron is an artist, storyteller, and he works in all kinds of mediums, and also had a exhibition at the Maison du Berger telling the story of his ancestor who was a shepherd and went to America and continued on his work. This was a poster of his exhibition, and he was of great help in introducing us to the various people of this culture and of Maison du Berger and Andre, and was able to share his work that also celebrates this wonderful work. This was in the chalet, just a small little apartment that they let the shepherds stay in when they're in transition from the high elevation in seasonal change. And this was in the boiler room. Sheep are everywhere. This was our discussion with Andre, with Christophe as our helper. What I couldn't express in French or Spanish, Guido and I were able to translate in the images that we brought of our work, and showing what our work looks like with bringing sheep and goats into urban scenes. And Andre definitely got a kick out of it because it's definitely something he doesn't experience in the Alps, but it was very important to have that cross-cultural exchange. Again, the Maison du Berger is an incredible resource for shepherds within the region, but also in educating folks who come far and wide to learn about how important grazing is to the history of managing these landscapes, and also the culture and the people. And these are a few of the brochures that I picked up that I just thought were so awesome. And as you can see on the left, with all of the different collaborators and members of that support this work, you have the EU, you have all of these regional organizations that celebrate the value of this. I thought this was extra cool. I love the illustration depicting, what visitors might find out on the road. You have the guard dog out there. You have kind of this idea of the high country and the low country. Pretty awesome. Guido and I were especially thrilled to have visited the Maison. From the Maison du Berger up in the Alps, we then traversed south down to the Provence region and to head to Montpellier, where there is one of the last schools that we visited. Dumel is under the institution of Montpellier Subagro, which is a training and research institution by the French government through the Ministries of Agriculture and Food, Education, Research, and Innovation. So 2 different ministries are supportive of Subagro, which is for the vocational training and research in sustainable development, business, science, and culture with a agricultural component. It was founded in 1931, so it's been around and established, a larger institution that's definitely Subagro has definitely supported the institution of Dumel to have longevity and to be very impactful in the training. It's definitely notorious for being one of the most important and significant training centers. It provides, through graduation, the accreditation of a level 5 degree, which kind of sits in between the merit of a bachelor's and associate's degree, and it's accredited and seen through the government as accreditation and a standard for the vocation of a shepherd. And helps with, of course, employment and whatnot. The training emphasizes animal husbandry, ecology, and transhumance, which is that notion of the seasonal migration. Generally 14 to 16 trainees a year. Historically, you have that age range as well, but the average you'll see is between 26 and 28 years old. The program is about 1 year long, and that's enable the trainees to go through a full life cycle of the animals through breeding and lambing and things like this, and going up into high altitudes and back down low. Average cost to the students is around 7,000 euro, but that actually isn't transferred to the students. Lots of subsidies provided, and some tuitions can be fully covered. Of course, it just depends on what kind of trainee you're applying into the program as. And this is us visiting Montpellier. The emphasis is on that alpine, that higher elevation shepherding without fences. A lot of it is that working and driving with dogs and understanding the ecology as well as animal behavior based on the circuits that you are grazing your animals throughout the day. You're going to have emphasis on training of predation preventions, work of guard dogs, how to night pen animals. Predation is a big issue. Ecology and transhumanists, again, what's the relationship like between the ecology and how the grazing managed participates in the ecology and plant biology, and really what are the goals of the national parks in which these shepherds are managing these animals in the commons. There's definitely ecological approach and goals that the shepherd is aware of when managing the animals. Andre Leroy is definitely a keeper of the knowledge and experience of the ecology and how it's transitioned over the years. This is just an example of the brochure that kind of gives the information to students. Of course, the work of working with guard dogs is a part of that predation issue is definitely there, and so that is actually part of the curriculum, is working with guard dogs. To the lower left, you'll see Michelle Jallet, and she's been the administrator for a very long time, a veterinarian, and one of the core administrators that makes things tick there. On the right, you'll see a depiction of Andre's daily circuits, notating different rest spots, water points, things like that, elevation. This is from the art and science of shepherding. Example of another standard circuit in one of the pastures or vicinities in which grazing takes place. Again, guard dogs. Tourists are educated on the use of guard dogs. Below, down in the corner, again, you can see all of the collaborators who develop these educational materials for the public awareness, and also just having it be a common understanding of that there are shepherds and there's guard dogs and there's sheep up there, and they're a part of this landscape. Within this region, in the Provence region, we were able to shadow some shepherds and interview an alumni of Dumel, and also and Antoine is a leader in one of the organizations that supports shepherds and helps place them into work, kind of like a cork board for shepherds and breeders looking for working for seasonal shepherds to hire. Jeanne Ahun is also a shepherd, a hired salaried shepherd. She gets paid to manage these animals for a certain duration of time. The breeder or producer understands and recognizes the benefits of these animals open grazing and her managing them versus him bringing feed to his animals at this time of year. The cost is not very much, it's very competitive, or they're very similar, but the the shepherding and the management of the grazing and open spaces in this circuit idea where the shepherd or shepherdess comes out, brings them out, and moves them through a landscape, takes them on a break, and then goes ahead and does the circuit again. It allows animals to do what they do naturally, and instead of bringing feed to them, you are allowing for them to do their own grazing or browsing. Um, and it provides a robustness that breeders are choosing to creating breeders choosing shepherds instead of feeding. They use electric fence. That is a part of it. Night penning is an electric fence, and then the shepherd or the shepherdess brings the animals out for these circuits. They use a guard dog slash herding dog, primarily called the Bousson. Um, Boucheron. My French, goodness. These guys are specific to the region. Every region we went to, there's a different breed of herding dog that it was culturally significant to that area. These are beautiful red-faced sheep. They're just so gorgeous and so healthy. It looks very similar to California's coastal or scrub kind of chaparral landscapes, very dry, brittle environment. These sheep are actually similarly managed how we manage in California around built environments. That Anton also moves his animals in electric fences to manage vegetation around basically homeowners associations and neighborhoods and things like this. So there is a kind of a similar, crossing of grazing in areas where there's lots of people living. Again, electric fence. They just have cooler colors. It was kind of nice to, kind of a relief to see that even salaried shepherds, professional shepherds in France still had the same issues that we have here in the Western United States, where we use electric fences, where we just didn't build the fence right, and we had 15 feet to build in between. So, yeah, equipment is equipment everywhere, and it's definitely scramble. It's not always easy, even if you do it all the time. So that's a picture of us working with Antoine to build some fence. Of course, Gallagher battery. Again, they work with the same tools we work with in using electric fence, or in Spain they call them pastores eléctricas, the electric shepherd. Antoine lambs inside and doesn't dock tails. He says he doesn't need to. He hasn't had any issues, no fly strike, nothing like that. They're beautiful, healthy lamb. He raises his own animals. He has several hundred head, I believe, and he produces lamb that's sold in their local grocery store. Something really fantastic about Provence was us finding that there are some really fantastic fiber producers. I saw this sign and required us to turn off to meet these Angora goats, cashmere guys, and it was wonderful to see what the regional fiber producers were up to in creating this wonderful mohair. The last shepherding school vocational training program for grazers was in the region of Catalonia and up into a different part of the Pyrenees. It was quite an adventure because communication was very little at the time, based on cell phone reception up in the Pyrenees. And I just put the name of the small little village that the school had headquartered from and just started trekking, trekking up north and on a single dirt road up into the Pyrenees, and came across this really beautiful little old town, not not fully inhabited, but one of the structures, it acts as a hostel, and all the trainees of the school come together to live for about 1 to 2 months and do all of their intensive technical training living in community. Uh, the Escola de Pastors de Catalunya is a project under the Socio Urbans, and this is in Montenartro, Lieda, Catalonia. This is just a screen grab from the school's website, translated, of course, promoting new peasants or new pastoralists or grazers. La Escola de Pastors de Catalunya, again under the Association of Urbans, their mission is to preserve rural pastoralism through ecological approaches. So they really have the lens of agroecology and regenerative agriculture and food sovereignty methodologies. They embrace the tenets of land access, and they're huge collaborators in a variety of projects of all kinds in celebrating or preserving the small farmer agricultural practices and education, as well as land stewardship. There's about 22 trainees per cohort. The ages range from 19 to 40, but the average is between 29 and 31 years old. A lot of these students come from already having higher education, and the ages somewhat indicate that they've already had a previous career. When I interviewed some of the students, I found that some of them too were kind of this idea of the neo-rurals coming from urban or suburban areas and really looking to have a different type of vocation and lifestyle, and really choosing this type of work as small farmers or as agrarians or grazers as both a political statement and also a search for having a quality of life that is rewarding. The training's about 6 months long. 2 of those months are immersive, living in community together. That was something unique about this school that I really enjoyed, is that they focused on building camaraderie between the students. Financial support is fully covered through government subsidies for students under 30 years old for economic development, rural development, through these funds for rural development and agriculture. To put a student through the 6 month program is about 4,000 euros, but only 800 euros are translated to the students who do have to pay. And this is through subsidies, mostly government aid. The school is also umbrellaed from Urbans, but it's also a project of Gripia. Living in community for the first few months, getting to know each other. It was encouraged from the get-go of everyone to bring something from their home or a book from their library to put together. You'll see all kinds of things that people have brought from different areas representing their different regions of Catalonia. Some came from the Basque Country. Where they are operating is in a national park in the Pyrenees. And I love, and of course that's in Catalan, but I love all of the words that students came up with to talk about how they are first feeling about their first weeks together. And I got to come in the very beginning of this particular cohort. Of course, sitting around after breakfast, getting ready for studies. It's really where a lot of the learning and cross-cultural exchange happens. I got to sit in on a class with the students. It was kind of tough to follow because it was in Catalan, but I got to see how one of the guest lecturers, who's a veterinarian, how she kind of broke down reproduction of sheep And I think this may have been from an equine or cow. I can't tell at this point. But that was really great to sit in on a course to kind of see the interaction and how classes were conducted. These are all shots from the school itself, and you can kind of see um, how awesome how awesome this school is in terms of their visual storytelling. Super relatable for a next generation. Very visual and beautiful, bucolic. Of course, a lot of folks on Instagram or whatever who see or Facebook who see these types of photos just really, really get excited about it and kind of glamorize it. But of course, for those of us who know what it's like to work with livestock or farming, it can look very beautiful and very photogenic, bucolic lifestyle. But of course, it's much more difficult and hands-on than you could ever imagine if you haven't had that experience. Um, the school really focuses on real people with families, modern day context of like what it means to be a farmer, how to live. This was a trainee of the school. Her name is Laura. She's in her early 20s. She's also considered a neo-rural. She chose to come to the school because she really was focusing on having creating a quality of life that she believed in. She didn't want an office job. She wanted to work with the earth and be a part of food sovereignty movement and ecological preservation of the region where she's from. So she decided to go to the shepherding school for this reason. And many of these students come from these non-traditional agricultural backgrounds. He was one of the very dedicated shepherds. It was really great to be at a training program where I felt like I was amongst peers and could imagine peers in the Western United States going through this similar training. It was really encouraging to see that this is happening and it's great, and these folks are working and finding jobs and creating businesses after these trainings. The cool thing about this particular school is that they collaborate in having their students go into working in specific projects with other organizations. Here are a few of those projects. One is Puros Life, and it's a project that preserves the brown bear. However, the brown bear lives in areas in which sheep producers also work to produce and graze their sheep, and so working for the conservationists for the brown bear with the school, they've created this program, Puros Life, where the shepherds are managing the farmers' sheep to manage for predation, and really working to create a bridge between the producers who are trying to protect their sheep and their livelihood with those who are trying to protect this species of animal that is sharing the environment in which these animals graze. Really cool project. Another key component of this school is the access to land project, where the school is a part of a network, a grassroots network of organizations that work to secure land for small farmers. They work in public education, advocacy, a lot of, again, the grassroots social movements and connecting farming organizations with one another, and creating pathways for new farmers with farm incubators. Project Life Montserrat. Montserrat is right outside of Barcelona, and we got to go and visit, and unbeknownst to us, they were using grazing as a tool for a restoration project in a meadow. Guido was on a morning hike and came up, heard goats and then found remnants of electric fence line. So we were able to see how these parks and open spaces are using grazing for regenerative management efforts, and the school is, participates in that and providing opportunities for their trainees to get on the ground experience as well as to serve these awesome projects. Another important project to note is Ixquita, which is celebrating the regional sheep and the fiber that it produces to create beautiful clothing. The fall collections translated to inland landscapes. Ixquita, very close to Fibershed and its pursuits. They pride themselves on ecological fashion and sustainability measures and supporting the tradition and culture of sheep and shepherding. They provide like a tour group experience where you can kind of go and see what it's like with the shepherd and the sheep, and to kind of see the full circle of their products of Ixquita. And you can find them simply online. They're doing pretty cool stuff. So, of those 4 schools, and in summarizing the research, we really found that cultural preservation was a very big piece of what these schools were providing for their larger communities, because the landscape and also the vocation and the preservation of these landscapes and cultures very, very significant, and the government valued what this vocation offers. It to kind of speak to Fred and Michelle's work in the art and science of shepherding. It's really that marriage of the theoretical, technical training with experiential learning, and how the crossing of wisdom and experience from those with many years in the vocation, how important that is. And in moving forward, it's very clear that science and researchers and practitioners really need to work together to create the foundation for us to move forward in supporting vocations as shepherds, because we're certainly as grazers and agrarians working to do good things for economy and the environment, and in social, both social impact and cultural preservation. We need all hands on deck, and that was something that was reiterated in the training and the curriculum, where was the approach that had to have both things. It couldn't all be indoors in the classroom, nor could it all be just an apprenticeship. All schools had some sort of emphasis on agricultural sustainability, food security, and a lot of the students were choosing this path for quality of life. Definitely no mention of making money. Curricula commonalities, place-based, again, technical and experiential training. There was the production aspect of the dairy, meat, and fiber. The professional development was pretty much the main, the underlying goal for all of these training programs was for translation into having a profession in this field. The programs were either 6 months to 2 years, depending on both the diploma or accreditation, and also what the emphasis was in terms of dairy production, or was it the seasonal transhumanant salaried shepherd type of job. A lot of the financial and institutional structure was dependent on both government subsidies and then larger academic or institutional structuring, just like the CFPPA, which is supported by the Ministry of Agriculture. You see that there's larger umbrellas of established organizations or institutions that already have a structure working with the government, and then the training programs are within that. So in the United States, it would look like if we had a university, private university, or even a public university that would house a grazer as a vocation kind of department, but mostly geared to a continuing education. So it would be like the University of California Extension Services, something like that. That kind of was the structuring that seemed to be the most common. Collaborations were huge within industry of the farmers and producers, public agencies, national parks, regional communities, private communities, like in Provence, the homeowners association kind of idea of grazing access to those open spaces or as a service. And support networks. There's a lot of organizations that were supportive of grazers and salaried shepherds to get jobs. A lot of these schools had 1 to 2 full-time administrators, but then would have guest instructors that were specialized to certain subjects. The average operating costs were about 100,000 euros a year. Again, different durations of time, different numbers of students. Full tuition covered full tuition costs for students was on average 4,000 euro. Full tuition up to $4,000, 4,000 euro for students. So it's a range of how much subsidy a student is able to receive. The demographics averaged 27 to 31, but the range was anywhere within the last few years, 19 to 45. You see the neo-rurals. You see an increase of female applications. Ratios are about 40 to 60%, and the hope is that you see that continuing to level. And a big part of that is the adaptation of the systems of the schools for those who go up into the Alps. The chalets, how are the chalets designed for families to live, just like Andre Leroy and his wife and raising 2 children? How have the chalets been renovated to support a small family? Also, depending on where one is in their life, women who are around 26, they say if you don't have a partner, you have to be conscious of where you're at in your life if you want to have a family or not, because you're living in complete seclusion, and that's something to consider, and that is actually a part of the conversation in curriculums is a essential piece to point out is where are you in your life, how do you want to live, and a lot of the kind of adaptation to the comforts of being a vocational shepherd is noteworthy. Again, that's just the re-emphasizing of the modernizing of this ancient vocation. You have technology being a part of creating feasibility in this modern day. So this sense of modernizing this ancient vocation with having satellites for cell phone reception or computer internet accessibility, cell phones, helicopters bringing in provisions on a regular basis, whereas in the past it could have been on a mule or a donkey out in the western United States, where the foreman would bring provisions, but it would be on horseback or mule or burro. They're using helicopters in the Alps, and the chalets are designed for families instead of the single shepherd. So when I think about what is this idea of modernizing this ancient vocation in the context of the western United States, when we think about having grazing be a service, managed grazing be a service, a public service, a public safety service, say using grazing to reduce vegetation at a wide scale in a short duration of time. What if we had grazers that were trained from the city who were managing these livestock along the city's peripheries in the open space. So they're actually close to home, but they're trained and they go out seasonally during these short periods of time to manage vegetation for, say, fire hazard reduction. What if these shepherds had access in their camp trailers, should they be on site 24/7, to internet for online coursework? Um, there's so many creative ways you can start thinking about how to integrate technology where it's stacked, because there is a lot of downtime in shepherding. When you're on, but when you're off, you can sit and watch the animals graze or browse, which I definitely recommend. Or in this new idea of having the urban grazers, perhaps time is utilized using to do virtual classwork, or even just connection to family if you're rural or in seclusion. So there's a lot to be said about this idea of the modernizing of the same ancient vocation. And this photograph was also from Rubens' La Scola de Pastor de Catalunya. Translating again to our Western context, United States, we have to really think about a place-based, inspired training that's responding to our specific needs and our specific challenges, and our specific opportunities. And we need to respond to our culture and traditions and needs and changing conditions within our regions. So it might not be one vocational program, but many, because of all of these unique things in our very grand landscapes of the United States. So when we're envisioning this grazers program here, we have to take into consideration all of these diverse bits, and see how a vocational training program can support grazers and businesses that focus on land management and understand what our agricultural scene is. All of these pieces that are unique to place. These are some of the questions, or some of the ideas. Is online coursework in the sheep camp while animals are grazing? How do we collaborate with a number of different types of organizations that are looking for job development and placement for various types of populations and demographics that haven't been traditionally a part of working with livestock on the land? How can we create jobs as ecological doctors, as land and livestock stewards? These communities could be youth at risk from the inner city, veterans, previously incarcerated individuals. All kinds of individuals can be considered, opportunities, be considered folks to have opportunities in working in this work. This then, in essence, creates an amazing platform for building more cultural connection to the environment, supporting work ethic, using our bodies, labor, and having more general awareness with food and fiber, having livestock really be a positive, interactive thing within our landscapes and the urban wild frontier or border or connection and bridge. I think they call that the wild urban corridor. That makes sense. So looking at the opportunities we have in creating a vocational program in the Western United States, it's important that we identify the needs and what kind of impact could something like this create in our neck of the woods. So myself, Guido, Olivia Tincani, and the Fibershed team together over the last year have been doing work to identify these needs in the American West. Here are a few of them. Challenges to entry as a new grazer. I get lots of inquiries all the time of folks being inspired by my history of not coming from agriculture, but then really taking my career path into being a modern day urban shepherdess. And so it would be really fantastic if there was some sort of clear entry point into this work that no university provides as a track in an accreditation at this point in time. The redefinition of a grazer, land access is tremendously hard for first-time grazers and farmers. So how do we redefine this work as a grazer, one that's not attached to ownership of land nor animals, but one that manages land and animals? And I think there's a ton of opportunity to do that in open spaces and to work with industry individuals who do have those resources, as well as the knowledge and experience to transfer to these greenhorn folks who want to come in. We need to understand our critical issues of good food production, grass-fed cattle and sheep industries, and the difficulty of acquiring skilled and reliable labor. Labor is one of the biggest issues that we're finding in the livestock production realm. How do we support a skilled and reliable labor force that also can be affordable to the producer and also support a viable livelihood for the labor, the grazer? Land stewardship opportunities. We have so much open space and so much vegetation that does need to be managed. Our forests need to manage open spaces around communities and homes and cities and suburbs and rural communities. We need to consider ecological health and soil fertility and really understand all of the opportunities that our management can provide increasing these things. Habitat conservation. How do we work with conservationists as grazers, livestock producers to work together to see the possibilities in our plans and management of livestock to achieve our goals to have healthy habitats for wildlife, to encourage desirable biodiverse landscapes and whole systems approaches to open space management. There's so many opportunities for baseline data collections, ecological monitoring, and then very relevant right now is broad acreage vegetation management that is an alternative to chemical and fossil fuel dependent mechanical reduction. How could we employ battalions of carefully managed sheep and goats and cattle to manage a lot of these open spaces that traditionally want to be burned? How can we use grazing as one of the various tools to manage this vegetation? We need increased research in science and documentation the impacts of positive impacts of managed grazing. Increased baseline metrics, accessible data collection protocols. Could grazers be the very ones who are collecting this data? Could they be trained to be really the keepers of understanding and practice and understanding how the grazing interacts with the environment, and are also the ones who are taking the data collection? I think that's really what encapsulates the definition of an ecological doctor as a grazer, is one who's really looking at the full picture, and science is a very big and important part of that. Carbon farming training practice and widespread adoption. Grazing can be a tool in this overall framework. Social impact through job creation, hard work for personal empowerment, and integration of these non-traditional demographics as new grazers. Like I previously mentioned, youth at risk, veterans, previously incarcerated individuals, and even refugee communities. How can we work with these types of organizations to train new folks to manage and be skilled in managing livestock at different scales in different locations? So we have a lot of research needs to understand the potentials of impacts. This includes, livestock industry, land stewardship, conservation, land management, needs and how the impact potentials, food and fiber, the needs for skilled labor, jobs, all of these things can be quantified, and then we can understand how there's potential for a training program to address some of these needs. What is already out there? I'm certain, and I've heard a lot through this work and just working on this project in particular, how there are efforts out there for this type of training. How do we all start talking to one another? We're gonna need to have regionalized trainings. We learned that place-based training was so important. Maybe we have the idea of a standardized curriculum, but every location, depending on the kind of eco tone or the ecology and the culture and the needs, is specific. We need to build relationships through different sectors and industries, and we need to create lasting collaborations that last longer than a grant period for funding. We need to find ways to keep a longevity within this plan. This includes reliable and continuing funding sources. And then we need to investigate new opportunities. Creativity is so important, innovation is so important, and innovation is all about creating new ways of doing things, or looking at the ways things have been done and adapting, modifying, evolving them for how it could work in a modern day scenario, and looking into the future, of course. Our next steps that we've identified as a team is basic market research of what's out there, a needs assessment on all of those different levels, our target audience identification. We need to survey industry stakeholders and prospective students to understand really from many angles what are these needs, what are the ideas. We need to find land bases and facilities. We need to find partnering organizations that have interest and common missions in a broader sense. We need to build partnerships with collaborators and educators. We need to investigate quantifiable potentials for program impacts. How does this look? Well, the hope is that we are igniting some conversation and that we find a platform to start building bridges. And not sure exactly how that looks like, if it's forum, if it's just folks who are reaching out after this to share what they have going on, be very, very important in starting those conversations or continuing them, as well as the invitation to invite you to participate in submitting these surveys. I think that'll be very helpful for us as we continue to capture more information about needs in our needs assessment. From the live webinar on October 12th, there has been questions that came up during that time. One regarding how important government financial help is for the viability of the schools. Well, in Europe, it was very huge. It was big. It was big. Subsidies are a very big thing for tuition. Universal health care keeps costs low for shepherds. Because education is covered, you don't see the same kind of debt that students are coming out of school with. In a vocational training program, your hope is not to come out of that program with debt, as your aim is to jump into your career or your vocation. So the next question was, well, without government assistance, how could we see that structuring in the United States? Well, I think if there's an understanding of the tremendous amount of positive impact regarding public safety, particularly in fire hazard prevention, the monies that are spent on fighting the fires could be redirected to new prevention methodologies outside of chemical and fossil fuel dependent treatments. And grazing, I believe, as well as many of us believe, when managed correctly and in accordance to ecological processes and with animal health in mind, we can achieve tremendous goals in managing vegetation and increasing the fertility, health, and overall resiliency of our landscapes. We just need folks on the ground who know how to do that, and we need the relationships at government level, at decision making level, at policy and advocacy level, in all different sectors and industries, private and public, to understand how impactful this can be and be taken seriously as grazers. So the face of the lonely shepherd of the American West can start transforming to have faces of all kinds of folks, and that this doesn't have to be a funny and quirky goats out in the park situation, but something that's let's bring the battalions of animals in and really make some big impact. So I think that there's opportunity for government funding and resources through the fund resources for fire prevention, as well as carbon sequestration efforts that we find are great in California. We can quantify uh, how much carbon sequester, or how much emissions are being mitigated using grazing versus using, say, two-stroke mechanical tools. We can definitely do that. We're still figuring out how we can quantify how much soil is being built in the soil, or how much soil is being built through our solely grazing. There's so many tremendous ways to build soil, but they're all interactive with one another, and in quantifying this potential, that could also be a piece we bring into the puzzle. Job development, creating jobs for folks, that is also a place that I think has potential for great. It's encouraging to think of funding coming from efforts for job development. And I think that the discussion needs to keep on going. Those are just thoughts that I've had in conversation with other grazer friends, mentors, educators, industry folks. It's important to hear your feedback and what you think to that, especially if you work for a public agency and have any ideas. That's going to be important. I wanted to share with you notes from Guido's travel journal. Here's some words that came together that he shared with me and that he found on our journey: ruthless collaboration, radical empathy, compassionate power plays, working as seriously as a child is playing. And I'll leave you with these quotes that he shared. I was so grateful to be on an adventure with someone with so much zest and gusto for life. And he certainly caught these beautiful moments in between of such quality. And I think that definitely needs to be brought into the conversation, that essentially we are all looking for equality and meaningful and rewarding life, and how does our work fold into that, and how do we separate the notion of our job versus how we live and who we are. And I think the work of the traditional grazer, the traditional shepherd, and the idea of having a new generation that evolves with time as modern day grazers, as ecological doctors, we have tremendous amount of opportunity, and I'm very encouraged by it, and I'm dedicated to identifying who those folks are and trying to rally us together to figure out how we can continue to grow opportunity for meaningful lifestyles that are impactful on the earth and impactful in our food and food and fiber realms of what we need. We need to wear clothes and we need to eat. How can we be a part of that? And then how do we, socially, culturally heal and find connections with so many divides that we have? So without further ado, I think the most important thing is to invite you into the conversation. Please be directed to pastoralismprevailing.com for links to industry surveys. We need to hear from you. Please speak up if you have any ideas on how to continue this conversation or would like to be a platform to hold this conversation in any capacity. Please reach out. My name is Brittany Cole Bush, and I'm representing a wonderful team who's passionate about these things too. Please reach out to us, Fibershed, Brittany Cole Bush at gmail.com, or Guido Fassini at truegrassfarms.com. And thank you very much. I appreciate you staying tuned to this and being interested. You will certainly have access to the report that we developed, and if you'd like access to these slides, they are available. Thank you so much.